pen was already in my hand when she touched my arm. Not grabbed, not yanked, just touched. 2 fingers on the inside of my wrist, the way you'd stop someone from stepping into traffic without making a scene. I looked up. She was maybe 30, 35, with the kind of face that doesn't give much away. A paralegal, I'd assumed, from the way she'd been moving quietly around the edges of the room, refilling water glasses, sliding folders across the conference table without being asked. "Mr. Calloway," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Could I show you where the restroom is?" It was such an odd thing to say. I'd been in that building before. I knew where the restrooms were. But something in her eyes made me set the pen down. My son-in-law gave me a look from across the table. My daughter kept her gaze on the papers in front of her. Neither of them said anything. I pushed my chair back and followed the young woman out of the conference room. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without the 18 months that came before it. My name is Roy. I'm 69 years old. I spent 32 years teaching high school history in Denton, a mid-sized town in central Ohio. The kind of place where you know the name of your mailman, and the diner on 5th Street has had the same pie rotating in the display case since 1987. I retired at 64, not because I was tired of teaching, but because my wife, Beverly, was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's and she needed someone home. We'd been married 41 years. I did not think twice. Beverly passed 2.5 years ago on a Tuesday in March, while the last of the winter snow was melting in the backyard. She died in the bedroom we'd shared for 38 years, in the house we bought for $112,000 when my daughter was still in diapers, in the town we'd chosen because it felt like the kind of place where a person could put down real roots. Grief does strange things to a person. I won't pretend I handled it well. For the first 6 months, I barely left the house. I ate cereal for dinner more nights than I care to admit. I watched a lot of bad television. I called my daughter Melissa too often, sometimes twice a day, just to hear a familiar voice. She always answered. I'll give her that. Melissa had married a man named Clifford about 12 years ago. Clifford sold commercial real estate and did well enough at it that they lived in a newer subdivision in Columbus, 40 minutes from Denton, in a house with a 3-car garage and a landscaping service that came every 2 weeks. He was pleasant enough at holidays. Shook my hand firmly. Always remembered to ask about my knee. We didn't have a great deal in common, but I'd never needed to. After Beverly died, things shifted. Melissa started calling more, visiting more. She'd drive down on weekends and sit with me in the living room, going to her mother's things with a gentleness that made my chest ache. She brought casseroles. She had our gutters cleaned without being asked. She was, in those months, the daughter I was grateful every day to have raised. It was somewhere around month 8 or 9 that the conversation started to change. Small things at first. Comments about the house, how big it was for one person, how the yard must be a lot to keep up with, how the stairs might become difficult as I got older. She wasn't wrong on any of those points. The house was big, the yard was a lot, my knee had been bad since a fall 2 winters ago, then it became more direct. Dad, Clifford and I have been talking. We'd love for you to move in with us. I told her I appreciated it, but I was fine where I was. We have the space. The basement's finished. It's basically its own apartment. You'd have privacy. I said I'd think about it. 3 weeks later, we've actually been looking at some numbers. If you sold the Denton house, you could put the money towards something that would really secure your future. Clifford has some ideas. Clifford's ideas. That was a new development. I should tell you what the Denton house was worth by then. Property values in our part of Ohio had climbed steadily in the years after the pandemic. A house that we'd bought for $112,000 in 1988 had been appraised in the spring after Beverly died at $387,000. We had no mortgage. It was mine, free and clear, left entirely to me in Beverly's will. I am not a naive man. I taught teenagers for 32 years. I know when a conversation has an agenda underneath it. But this was my daughter. This was the woman I'd driven to soccer practice and helped with her college essays and walked down the aisle. I told myself I was being uncharitable, suspicious of people who loved me, which is a lonely way to live. So I kept listening. And over the following months, I found myself slowly, almost without noticing, being steered. The idea that emerged, Clifford's idea, presented by Melissa with careful warmth, was this: I would sell the Denton house. The proceeds would be folded into a family trust that Clifford would manage, structured in a way that would protect the assets and ensure I was taken care of for the rest of my life. I would move into their basement apartment. My living expenses would come from the trust. They would handle everything. I asked a number of questions. The answers were always reasonable, always delivered with patience, always accompanied by some version of, "We just want to make sure you're secure, Dad." I want to be honest about something. Part of me wanted to believe it, not because I was foolish, but because I was lonely, because the house in Denton still had Beverly's handwriting on a recipe card stuck to the refrigerator, and some mornings I couldn't walk past it without having to sit down for a minute. Because the idea of being close to family, of not eating cereal alone on a Tuesday night, had a pull to it that I didn't know how to argue against. I told them I needed time. They gave it to me, and I used it poorly, mostly talking myself into things I should have been talking myself out of. By the following spring, I had agreed in principle. I found a buyer for the house in Denton. The closing date was set. Clifford's attorney, not my attorney, Clifford's, had prepared the trust documents. All that was left was for me to sign. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon at a law office in Columbus called Hargrove & Finch. It was a real firm. I'd looked it up. 8 attorneys, a professional website, conference rooms with leather chairs, and a water pitcher that someone kept filled. I drove myself up from Denton that morning. It was April. Cold still, the kind of gray Ohio spring that can't quite commit to being warm. I wore the blue blazer I'd bought for Beverly's funeral and immediately felt strange about that. So I stopped at a Panera on the way and changed into a flannel shirt in the men's room. Melissa and Clifford were already there when I arrived. So was a man I didn't recognize who was introduced to me as the firm's senior associate handling the trust documentation. He was polished and brisk and used a lot of words I'd heard before, but had never had cause to use myself. Fiduciary, irrevocable, grantor. That word stopped me. Irrevocable, grantor. That word stopped me. Irrevocable. I asked what that meant in practice. The attorney explained it the way attorneys explain things when they don't want you to think too hard about what they're saying. Smoothly, with just enough detail to sound thorough and just enough vagueness to prevent real understanding. Clifford put his hand on my arm. "It's standard language, Roy. Protects everyone." Melissa smiled. It was a smile I recognized, the one she used when she was waiting for something to be over. The document was placed in front of me. It was many pages. I had not brought my reading glasses, which was careless of me, and when I asked for a moment to read through it, the attorney slid a summary sheet across the table as if that were the same thing. It was not the same thing. I was reaching for the pen when the young woman touched my arm. In the hallway, she walked me past the restrooms and around a corner to a small alcove near the firm's kitchen. She checked over her shoulder before she spoke. "I'm sorry to do this," she said. "I work here as a paralegal. My name is Audrey. I've been with this firm for 4 years, and I've never done anything like this before, and I may lose my job over it." I told her to go ahead. "The trust document you're about to sign is irrevocable," she said. "That's not unusual by itself, but the trustee named in that document, your son-in-law, has essentially complete discretionary authority over disbursements, meaning he decides when and whether you receive funds from your own money. There are provisions in there that would make it extremely difficult for you to challenge that in court, especially if he determined that any distributions were not in your best interest." She paused. "You would be signing over nearly $400,000 with very limited legal recourse." I stood there in that alcove next to the coffee maker, and I looked at a woman I had never met before, and I understood that what she was telling me was true. Not because I had the legal knowledge to evaluate it, because something in me had known for months and had been choosing not to. I asked her why she was telling me this. She looked down for a moment. My grandmother signed something like this 8 years ago. She died in a facility she hated because there wasn't enough money left to move her. She looked back up. I couldn't watch it happen again. I asked what I should do. Don't sign anything today, she said. Tell them you want to take the documents home and have your own attorney review them. If they're legitimate, they'll agree to that without any issue. If they push back. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I thanked her. She nodded once and walked back toward the front of the office. I stood in that alcove for a minute longer, listening to the coffee maker drip, thinking about Beverly's recipe card on the refrigerator. Then I walked back into the conference room. The shift in the room was immediate. You know the way a temperature can change when you come inside from the cold? It was like that, but in reverse. I sat down. I did not reach for the pen. I told them I'd like to take the documents home and have my own attorney review them before signing. Melissa's smile went very still. Clifford leaned forward. The attorney cleared his throat. Roy, we've had these documents prepared for several weeks, Clifford said. Your daughter and I have already made arrangements based on... I understand, I said. I'd still like my attorney to review them. I did not have an attorney. I had not needed one in 30 years. But I said it calmly, the way I used to tell a student that their essay needed another draft. Not unkindly, not open to debate. Clifford tried several more approaches. The documents were time-sensitive. The trust structure would need to be reconfigured if not signed before the end of the fiscal quarter. My hesitation was, he implied, the kind of thing that happened when elderly people became confused by complexity. That word, elderly, landed somewhere it was not intended to land. I picked up my copy of the summary sheet, folded it in thirds, and put it in my shirt pocket. I told them I'd be in touch. I thanked the attorney for his time. I did not make eye contact with my daughter as I stood. In the elevator going down, I thought I might be sick. By the time I reached the parking garage, the shaking had started in my hands. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. I did find an attorney. Her name was Carol Whitfield, and she was a friend of a colleague from my teaching days who had recommended her as no nonsense, which turned out to be the most accurate description of a professional I had ever encountered. I brought her the summary sheet and described the meeting as best I could. She asked me several precise questions. Then she asked if I could get her a copy of the full document. I called Melissa and told her I'd left the meeting abruptly because I'd felt unwell. My blood pressure, I said, something I was managing, and that I'd like a copy of the full trust document to review. There was a pause. She said she'd ask Clifford. 3 days later, the document arrived by email. Carol read it over a weekend. She called me Monday morning. Roy, she said, I want you to sit down. I was already sitting, but I didn't mention that. She walked me through it methodically. The trust was structured so that Clifford held what she called sole trustee authority, with minimal accountability provisions. There was language buried in Section 7, which was 4 pages in, that allowed him to determine whether distributions were in my health, maintenance, education, or support interest, with himself as the sole arbiter of that determination. There was a clause limiting legal challenges to a 90-day window after signing. There was another clause that defined incapacity broadly enough that a letter from a single physician could allow him to assume permanent control without court involvement. If you had signed this, Carol said, and then later had a health event of any kind, a fall, a hospitalization, any diagnosis, he could have effectively frozen your access to your own funds with very little legal obstacle. I asked if any of it was a legal obstacle. It's aggressive, she said, unconscionably so. In my opinion, particularly given the power imbalance and the circumstances of your bereavement. Whether it crosses into elder financial abuse under Ohio statute is something we'd need to examine further. But Roy, you didn't sign it. So right now, your assets are entirely your own. I asked her what I should do. She told me to take no action immediately, to let her make some inquiries, to say nothing to Melissa or Clifford that would signal what I knew. I was remarkably good at this part. 32 years of keeping a straight face through parent-teacher conferences had prepared me for more than I realized. What I did in the weeks that followed was quiet and careful and nothing like what I might have imagined doing if you'd told me a year earlier that any of this was coming. I did not confront my daughter. I did not call Clifford and tell him what I thought of him. I did not do any of the things that would have felt satisfying in the moment and cost me everything in the long run. I called my realtor in Denton and told her the sale was on hold, that there were some family matters to sort through. She was understanding. The buyer was disappointed, but the contract allowed for a delay. I opened a new bank account at a credit union in a town 20 miles from Denton under my name alone and began moving a portion of my liquid assets there. Carol advised me on which steps were legally appropriate and which were not. I followed her guidance precisely. Carol also made a quiet inquiry to the Ohio State Bar Association regarding the attorney at Hargrove and Finch, specifically around whether proper disclosures had been made to an unrepresented third party me during a transaction where the firm's client was arguably in an adverse position to my interests. I also called my nephew, Owen, who was a retired sheriff's deputy and someone whose judgment I have trusted since we were boys. I told him the full story. He listened without interrupting, which is unusual for him, and then said 5 words, "What do you need from me?" I said I mostly needed someone to know. He drove down from Akron that Saturday, and we ate pizza at my kitchen table, and he helped me go through the full trust document with a highlighter because Owen has always processed things better when he can hold a pen. 3 months after the meeting at Hargrove and Finch, Clifford received a letter from Carol Whitfield's office. It was not a lawsuit. It was a carefully worded document that outlined, in clear and specific language, her assessment of the trust structure, the circumstances under which it had been presented, and her intention to file a formal complaint with the Ohio Department of Commerce's Division of Financial Institutions should any further attempt be made to obtain my signature on any financial document without my independent legal representation present. She also CC'd the letter to the attorney at Hargrove and Finch. I was told later by Carol that the attorney at Hargrove and Finch had withdrawn from the matter within a week. I heard from Melissa 10 days after the letter was sent. She called on a Sunday evening, and I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't understood the full scope of what Clifford had drawn up, that she trusted him when he said it was standard, that she loved me and was ashamed and hoped I would call her back. I listened to that voicemail several times over several days. I thought about the casseroles. I thought about the weekends she'd spent going through her mother's things. I thought about how grief can make people do things they might not otherwise do, and how that is not entirely an excuse, but it is not entirely nothing either. I called her back on a Wednesday. It was not a warm conversation. It was not a resolution, not in any clean narrative sense. There were things said that we will both need more time with, but she answered, and she did not make excuses, and she cried in a way that I recognized as real. I don't know yet what that means for us going forward. I am still figuring that out. I did not sell the house in Denton. I painted the porch that summer, a deep green that Beverly had always wanted, but we'd never gotten around to. I hired a kid from the high school to help with the yard. I got my reading glasses prescription updated, which I should have done 2 years ago. In September, I drove to Columbus and had lunch with Owen and his wife at a restaurant they like, and on the way home, I took the long route back through farmland and yellow fields and the particular Ohio light that comes in autumn, low and golden and a little tired, and I thought about Audrey. The paralegal and what it must have cost her to do what she did. I found out, through Carol, that Audrey had not lost her job. The firm had apparently been more interested in distancing itself from the situation quietly than in making an example of her. I sent her a card. I didn't know her last name, so I addressed it to Hargrove and Finch. Attention, Audrey. And I wrote inside it only this: because of you, I still have a home. Thank you. I don't know if she received it. I hope she did. There's a thing that happens when you've been teaching for a long time. You start to see patterns in people. The student who acts out because they're scared. The parent who pushes too hard because they're overcompensating for something. The kid who's too quiet, who you have to watch because quiet can go in either direction. I spent 32 years reading rooms, and I had still almost missed this one. That's the thing I sit with, on the nights when I sit with things. Not anger, mostly. Anger is exhausting, and I'm 69, and I have better uses for my energy. But a kind of sober recognition that loneliness is its own vulnerability, that grief can soften the edges of your better judgment, and that the people most likely to take advantage of that are often the ones you would least expect. Beverly used to say that the most important thing she ever learned was the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them. She was wiser than me in most things. I wish I had applied that particular lesson with a little more rigor at the time. The recipe card is still on the refrigerator, her handwriting, a little slanted, always in blue ink, for a lemon pound cake she made every Easter. I've made it twice now, on my own. The first time was terrible. The second time was better. I think the third time was better. I think the third time will be right. The porch is green. The yard is manageable. The house is mine. Some mornings I stand at the kitchen window with my coffee and look out at the backyard, and I think, this is enough. This quiet. This ordinary morning. This particular light. This is what I almost let someone take from me. And I am grateful, with something that has no performance in it, that I set the pen down when a stranger touched my arm. I've had a lot of time to think about what almost happened in that conference room. Not the legal details. Carol walked me through all of that, but the part that keeps me up some nights, how close I came to handing everything over with a smile on my face, because I wanted so badly to believe the people asking me to sign were people who loved me. That's the part nobody warns you about. It's not that grief makes you stupid. It's that grief makes you hungry for closeness, for family, for the feeling that you are not facing the rest of your life entirely alone. And when someone offers you that, when your own daughter sits across from you with casseroles and kind words and a plan that sounds like it's built around your security, your mind will find every reason in the world to trust it. Because the alternative, that the person you raise could be part of something designed to take from you, is a thought so painful that your brain would rather do almost anything than hold it. I don't think Melissa set out to harm me. I've thought about this more than I probably should, and I've landed somewhere that I'm not sure has a clean name. She made choices she shouldn't have made, let herself be led by a man whose motivations were not what she told herself they were, and looked away from things she should have looked at more carefully. That's not innocence. But it's also not the same as malice. People are rarely one clean thing. Clifford is a different matter, and I'll leave it at that. What I keep coming back to is Audrey, a woman I had never met who owed me nothing, who risked her livelihood for a stranger because she had watched something like this happen to her own grandmother and could not let it happen again. That is a particular kind of courage, not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that announces itself, but the quiet kind that shows up in an alcove next to a coffee maker and says the true thing even when it costs you. I think about what I would have done in her position. I like to believe I would have done the same. I'm not entirely sure. Here is what I know now that I did not fully understand before. Your judgment is only as good as your willingness to use it. I had good instincts throughout all of this. I noticed when the conversation shifted. I felt the unease when words like irrevocable were explained away too smoothly. I saw the look on my daughter's face when I asked for more time. The information was there. What I lacked, for too long, was the willingness to trust what I was seeing over what I wanted to be true. Wisdom isn't knowledge. It's the courage to act on what you already know, even when acting on it is painful. I am 69 years old. I have a green porch and a lemon pound cake recipe. I'm still getting right, and a house that belongs to me. I have Owen, who drove down from Akron without being asked, and Carol, who read a trust document over a weekend so I wouldn't have to face it alone, and Audrey, somewhere in Columbus, who I hope received a card with no last name on it. I have enough, more than enough, and I am done mistaking loneliness for a reason to hand it over.